Hello and welcome to Chapter 5 of And I Shall Be Healed, rather appropriately on Armistice Day 2014. Okay. Chapter 5. The Old House at Home, Singleton, West Sussex, January 1917. Eleanor is giggling behind me as I cling to the picture rail, my legs treading air. Where's the stool? Ludicrously, the Christmas garland is still clenched in one hand, though the pin has dropped to the ground. The laughter continues, and above the sound I can hear someone at the front door. Lieutenant Forrester's voice is suddenly urgent in my ear. "Get down, Leo, quickly." But it is too late. I glance under my arm and see Stephen standing in the doorway, his face deathly pale above his clerical black. He takes a ragged step forward, his mouth working, his eyes always on my face. I drop to the ground and feel my ankle go, but before I can give it any thought, his hands are at my throat. "How could you? How could you?" He is sobbing, screaming the words, yet all I can hear is the horrified silence around us. "I tried to help you," he wails, his thumbs pressing into my jugular until black spots appear in front of my eyes. "I tried to help you and you took all that was good from my life." I am choking for breath, but he goes on, his eyes blank with despair. "I cannot forgive you," he whimpers. "Do you understand? I cannot forgive you. You have destroyed me." I wake suddenly from my nightmare, breathless and frightened. The dream has brought back memories that I hope never to revisit. The lamp has burnt dry, so I light a candle and sit up in bed, clutching the blanket around me, watching the flame until the tightness in my chest has eased. Downstairs, the clock in the hall chimes a long, late hour in its solemn night-time tones. Of course, it can only be the draught from the chimney making me shiver. Yet it is some time before I can persuade myself out of bed to take my coat from the back of the door. Standing in the gloomy room, wrapping the coat tightly around me, a piece of paper pinned to the chimney breast catches my attention. By the light of my candle I look again at Jack's childish drawing of a red-coated soldier fighting the Boers. Even to my biased eye it is not a good drawing. Jack was no draftsman. But I remember how proud he was of it, the hours he spent drawing and redrawing to ensure every detail of the uniform and weaponry was exact. The Boer, by contrast, received considerably less attention, and with his wide hat and dull clothes reminds me of an itinerant farm labourer of the kind we often saw in Chichester on market days. My eyes linger on the British soldier. Jack had often talked about joining the army, but I distinctly remember his enthusiasm waning when he realised that the red coat was no longer worn. He would have been very disappointed at the sight of me in khaki. I turn away from this last remnant of my brother and stand still with my back to the fireplace. Through the heavy silence comes the sound of someone coughing, and, still thinking of Jack, my heart lifts. It is a cruel sensation, and I force the thought away and open the door. Such fancies are not healthy. Sure enough, my mother's door is open, a glow of light visible from within. I step quietly along the passage, startling myself as my reflection looms at me from the mirror at the end of the hall. This time I will be brave, and ask her if there is anything she needs. "All right, sweetheart, all over now," my father's voice murmurs from within the room. His presence makes me hesitate, uncertain whether to be welcome. Feeling like a voyeur, I peer cautiously into the room. My father is sitting on the bed, holding my mother in his arms. Her head rests against his shoulder, and her breathing comes fast and shallow. "I want my Jack." "He's not here, sweetheart, you know that." "I heard him coughing," my mother murmurs. "I thought he was close. I felt him." "I know you did," my father tells her. "You will see him again soon, my love." He strokes her hair, kisses her forehead, and holds her close. "We have another son, Edie," he says softly. "He's here, and I know he would like to see you." Her face hidden against my father's chest, it is only the undulation of my mother's hair in the lamplight that tells me she is shaking her head. "He is not my son," I hear her say, her voice muffled against my father's shirt. "Of course he is," Father gives her a little shake. He's our Leo, love. Our little Leo. You remember, Edie, all those weeks we were afraid he wouldn't live. I wish he hadn't. Oh. The revulsion in my father's voice takes me by surprise. Edith, you don't mean that. I do. I stand frozen to the spot as Mother coughs into the handkerchief my father holds to her mouth. He was always a selfish boy, and I see no change in him now. He works hard, love, always has. If he doesn't come home often, well, he's young. He's done well for himself. Properly educated he is, and now he's serving his country at war. He's a boy to be proud of. He isn't the man my Jack would have been, Mother insists. He's not one of us, never the slightest interest in being a part of this family. Jack would have made this place like it was in my father's day. What will this other one do? Bury us both and turn away. There's no loyalty in him, no thought for anyone but himself. And when I think my boy would have lived but for him, that is nonsense. There's anger in my father's voice now. Jack was ill. That had nothing to do with Leo, any more than your illness now. Mother raises her head. How can you know that? What has that boy ever given this family but worry? A business ready and waiting for him, and he goes running off to the church. He's too poor to secure a living, and he'll never fit in with that lot. For all his education, he isn't their sort, and he never will be. They're laughing at him, the innkeeper's son who thinks he's a gentleman. It was that friend of his, encouraging him, making him believe he was better than he was. And we all know how Stephen Forrester has ended up. She coughs before speaking again, and now I can hear tears in her voice. My fine, lovely boy gone, and the other one living the life he should have had. He would have been a success, John. You know we will never be able to say the same of him. Her voice swoops to a low whimper, and it is just possible to make out the words. Jack, my lovely boy. I have heard enough, and tear myself from my observation post to go back to my room. My father must have noticed the movement, for he glances up and sees me. For a moment our eyes meet, and his mouth falls open in dismay. I shake my head and go, forcing rubbery legs to move along the passage until I am once more in the safety of my room. Where are the guns? I need the comfort of their chaos in all this silence and sickness. Give me the cleansing division of life and death, a good wholesome shout of annihilation, rather than these disease-ridden whispers. My plan to visit Stephen seems to mock me now, and my throat constricts at the thought. I can't do it. Not yet. Not yet. It is still dark when I leave my room. My mother's door is closed, and I reach the stairs unobserved. The kitchen is bitterly cold. The stove is out, and there is no wood in the basket. I unbolt and wrench open the back door, the wood swollen in the wet weather. A fox barks from somewhere on the hill, and I stand in the yard thinking of the men in France. How many of them are out there now, lying under this same sky? How many of them still alive? How many now dead? I remember the work of the CCS, the noise, the need they have of me there. I to die having never distinguished myself in a way that my mother would recognise, I would at least have served a purpose. I might have been of use to someone, even if only as a letter writer and not as a priest. My last conversation with Armstrong comes back to me, making me cringe inwardly my naivety. How could I have ever imagined myself as a source of spiritual guidance to the fighting man? How glib my assurances of life everlasting and duty done must have sounded. How laughable from a man who has spent his life running away. Now my mother's words really hit home. All these years away, I had almost forgotten this side of myself. Who would want to remember? The coward in me has taken refuge in the image of myself that the war has created. Picturing myself over there, I hardly recognise the chaplain that moves among the men. Capable, confident, perhaps even liked. Has it all been nothing more than pretence? My chest aches with loneliness and a kind of panic. If it has been pretence, how can I go on, knowing that the man I am in France doesn't really exist. A vast moon appears between the trees, a hunter moon, so low that it almost looks like it has been waiting on the top of the gate, waiting for me. It is a cold and calming sight, and I stand and just look at it, feeling the same sense of awe that has sometimes filled me during midnight vigils. It reminds me that, unworthy and sinful as I am not alone in this vast and terrible world, nor will this body that clothes my soul endure forever. I must do some good in the time given to me. It must not be wasted in self-pity. How dare I complain at the way I am treated when I have done as much harm in my turn? It is hard. I remember my father's defence of me, and have to clench my jaw against the emotion that threatens. In the darkness I kneel down and pray, the moon my votive before me. I pray for help, and for the strength to take the first step along what I know will be a long, hard road. My father comes into the kitchen as I am feeding logs into the stove. He is still in his work clothes. He hasn't been to bed. It's not too early, is it? I ask, realizing that it is only just past 5. My father shakes his head and, lifting the kettle from the hob, goes into the yard to fill it at the pump. When he comes back, I am sitting at the kitchen table, tapping out a cigarette. His hands rest briefly on my shoulders. "Don't take it to heart, Leo," he says. "She hardly knows what's saying." I take the cigarette from my mouth as it takes the flame, shaking out the match. She's right, though, isn't she? I haven't thought of anyone but myself. I haven't been loyal. My father says nothing. At the kettle's whistle, he lifts it from the hob and fills the pot. In silence, he sets down one of the earthenware mugs before me and sits down. I watch him look thoughtfully into his tea. "If I'm honest," he says, raising his head but keeping his eyes on the plume of steam rising from his mug, "I was disappointed with the way you abandoned Mr. Forrester when he became ill." He looks at me. "He always did such a lot for you." It is a familiar reproach, one that I have rehearsed many times in my own mind, that I shake my head in frustration. "It wasn't that straightforward." "I know that." "No, you don't." Tiredly, I run my hands through my hair and rest my head against my fist. "I do." Father takes a gulp of his tea. "He told me." I look at him in astonishment. "He told you?" My father nods. "Last year it was. Maybe not so long ago as that. I can't remember exactly, but he was in here, desperate for news of you. He had been carrying on like that for weeks. He was making himself a laughingstock, except no one was really laughing. Not." He taps his head knowingly. Always the same question, exactly the same, asked in exactly the same way and in the same tone of voice. He reaches for one of my cigarettes from the packet on the table. I strike a match for him and he leans forward to the flame. You couldn't interrupt him neither. He eases back in his chair, settling into the story. If I tried to tell him, no news, before he had finished speaking, he'd frown, shake his head, and then start his question from the beginning, exactly the same. Exactly. Father stabs his finger at my chest to reinforce his point. Too used to the dutiful response he got in church, I dare say. Mrs. King told me about that. I light another cigarette. She said she told his wife. Aye, she did. But not before I'd had him back here and demanded to know what was going on. My father stares into his tea again. It was enough to know that you had always preferred his company to mine. I didn't want all that rehearsed in public, with him carrying on like the worried father. You're my son, not his. He scratches his stubbly chin. I never had much time for Stephen Forrester. Always thought there was something odd about him. He shrugs. Nice enough. No harm in him, of course. But nervy. Highly strung. Always something going on behind the eyes. You know? I know he was kind to you that time in church, after Jack. But he was almost in tears himself. You're not going to tell me that's normal in a grown man. No, I agree, embarrassed now by the memory. I suppose not. Anyway, I knew something had happened between you, so when I got him in here, I told him straight. I wanted to know why my son had gone off to war when he didn't need to go, and why we'd seen neither hide nor hair of him since. And he told me. He fixes me with a level look. As you should have done. They made me promise. Who? Eleanor and Lieutenant Forrester. You could have told me, Leo. I'm your dad. I know that, I tell him. I was ashamed, I think. Why? I thought it was my fault. We hadn't been getting on, Stephen and I. I wanted to leave almost from the moment I came home. I was not perhaps as forbearing as I should have been. He frightened you, didn't he? I catch his eye and nod. I really thought he was going to kill me, but that isn't the only reason I went. You really wanted to go to war. I thought I could be of some use. And are you? I think of Phillips on the boat, the men at the CCS, their need for someone to listen to them. Yes, Dad, I think I am. My father heaves himself out of his chair, pressing his hand to my shoulders as he passes. He brings the teapot back to the table and indicates my mug. I shake my head and watch him refill his own. I'm sorry if you thought I preferred Stephen, I say awkwardly. I didn't, not exactly. It's just that I missed having a brother. I felt lost without Jack. That I understand, my father replies. You always did need someone to look up to. You idolised Jack. It's only natural you found a replacement. But Stephen Forrester has more than 10 years on you. It made me feel that you weren't looking for another brother, but a father more to your liking. Dad, it was his trade you've taken, not mine, my father points out. What else am I to think? I was a cooper when I married your mother and took over this place. It was hard work, but I built up this business so that my sons would have something to inherit. Now who will have it after me? I had 2 sons. Now one is dead, and the other far beyond my reach. The inn was Jack's inheritance, I tried to explain. I never thought it would come to me, and I never envied Jack his birthright. Mother was right. I wanted more than I had. I wanted to be more than I was. Not the Dorlin who was always in the way, always in the wrong. I hear the bitterness in my voice and stop. I want to apologise, to explain, not accuse. I wanted to be someone else. Like Stephen Forrester. I resented the tutoring at first, I say. It felt like a punishment for falling behind at school. But when the housekeeper showed me into his study, all I felt was relief. I fall silent, remembering that feeling of peace and order, a world away from the raised voices and tensions of home. The inn was always so noisy, and Mother would find me a job every time she saw me open a book. But the vicarage was quiet, and the work I had struggled with at school suddenly seemed easy. There was nothing Stephen didn't know, and he didn't treat me as the naughty pupil I had been, but as a fellow explorer into whatever subject lay before us. I wanted to be like that. I wanted to be kind and calm and clever, just like he was. Just like I thought he was. Remorse chokes me. I'm sorry, Dad. I wasn't trying to replace you. It's just that he was there. I'm so sorry. No, my father meets my eyes only briefly. You were a child, Leo. It was my own fault that I should have taken better care when Jack got ill. But as it was, we rather forgot about you. It doesn't matter now. Oh, it does, Leo. It does. Father doesn't look at me, but reaches out and puts a hand on my arm. Grief does strange things to a man. Even now I don't remember things very clearly. It's only now when I look back that I realise. When Jack died, we lost you too. Thank you. See you next week.